Are we online, Edmund?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone in United States, and good evening, our fellow panelists and guests who are joining from India, Taiwan, and rest of the world. Welcome to the first joint Council for Strategic Affairs and United Services Institution of India webinar. Today is Saturday, February 15th, 2025, and it is 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in US. All of those who are seeing see the CSA logo, and this is the insignia or the logo of United Services Institution of India. And most of you who registered online probably saw this flyer. The topic for today's online webinar is Trump 2.0 era, opportunities and challenges for India. Our distinguished guests and panelists include Major General B.K. Sharma, Mr. Ron Alido, Major General R.S. Yadav, Professor Sen Nee, Professor Walter Anderson, and Lieutenant General Anil Ahuja. This is a little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs, which I will not go into detail because of paucity of time. You can go on our website, www.councilforstrategicaffairs.org. We are a 501c3 registered with IRS as a non-profit organization. We are a think tank with a number of activities. I will just show you the pictures of our panelists and participants, and I'll introduce them as and when they come. This is Major General B.K. Sharma. This is Mr. Ron Alido. This is Major General R.S. Yadav. This is Professor Sen Nee. This is Professor Walter Anderson. And this is Lieutenant General Anil Ahuja. As I said, the topic for today's webinar is Trump 2.0 era, opportunities and challenges for India. As all of you know, President Trump's second term in the first 3 weeks has changed the geopolitical discourse in the entire world. Recent US visit of Indian Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi on February 12th and 13th has brought a number of synergies between the US and India. The personal chemistry between the two leaders, President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, has been exceptional. A 36-point joint communique was issued, and this is the URL for the joint communique. Continued bilateral cooperation and fostering a multi-dimensional relationship has geopolitical significance, not just for Indo-Pacific region, but for the entire world. We have a very packed program, which I will try to adhere to. A couple of points, housekeeping points. I want everyone to stay muted. I would like people to change their cell phone to vibration mode. I would like people not to interrupt our esteemed panelists as and when they are speaking. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to ask questions. No anonymous questioners, please. All the questions will be moderated through the chat room. Questions need to be specific and precise. Don't send a lengthy monologue or comments. This program is being recorded. It's also being live streamed on YouTube. So in interest of time, I'm not going to make any further comments. It's my pleasure to introduce Major General B.K. Sharma, who is the director of the United Services Institution of India. Major General Sharma was commissioned in 6th Light Infantry Regiment in 1976 and superannuated in 2012. He has been the Director General of USI, India's oldest think tank established by the British in 1870. It's an old think tank. He was conferred 3 military awards by President of India for rendering exceptional distinguished national service and for displaying courage. Besides, he was conferred National Award for Nation Building by the Confederation of Educational Excellence of India in 2017. He has attended a number of courses. He has represented the country in United Nations as a military observer in Central America, has been defense attaché in Central Asia. He specializes in strategic net assessment methodologies, scenario building, and strategic gaming. He has participated in several international conferences. He has edited several books, contributed more than 100 seminal papers in various publications. He has lectured at prestigious military establishments, policy think tanks, universities, and literature festivals. He regularly participates in track 1.5 level dialogue with number of foreign think tanks. So without further ado, I will invite Major General B.K. Sharma to give his opening comments. Major General B.K. Sharma, the floor is yours, sir. Please, 5 minutes only. Sir, you are muted. Kindly unmute yourself.
Greetings from India to all our participants, and thanks to Dr. Timki for sort of taking this initiative to have this joint uh, webinar being organized on a very, very topical issue. Now, we all have been following what is going on between India and United States of America, but I would tend to say that we have to look at this relationship from a higher vantage point. And if you look at the higher vantage point, that we know that uh, uh, there was a forging of Euro-Atlantic Alliance, refurbishment of Euro-East Asian Alliance, and there was some kind of a tie-up being brought about between the two, and also revival and strengthening of NATO. This was taking place. In the meanwhile, there was also a counter realignment of geopolitical grouping, and that was what we call as CRING, that is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. But there were concurrently these different conflicts which were going on, and there was a little bit of a doubt about the prognosis of these conflicts. But what we see that, well, there is Russia's military ascendancy in Ukraine, and there is a question today on Europe's resolve to stand up to Russia because of different geopolitical factors. Also, we saw that there's been weakened Iran and its proxies and fall of Assad regime in Syria. But has it secured a better future for Israel is a moot point, or there is a lot more that needs to be done. We also know that the Chinese economy is facing headwinds, and there are problems they are facing in terms of debt and in terms of in terms of their trade and the supply chain routes and many other things. But they've also come out with what you call is the DeepSeek, a breakthrough technology which created a major disruption in terms of share markets in the United States of America. And a new model has been brought to the fore. Also, very recently, they did the testing of what you call is the J-36 aircraft, which is the stealth aircraft, first of its kind. You know, even the United States not been able to do that. Then we also see that at this juncture, while there was certain paradigms being formed, forged, or they were crystallizing, the arrival of Trump has brought certain uncertainties with it, be it tariffs, be it expatriations at a very large scale, be it his radical solution to Gaza, or end of Ukraine war perfectly on Russian terms, that the loss of territory is almost a fait accompli, or disdain towards Europe. If you look at the the statements or the speech which was made by Vice President Vance at Munich Security Dialogue, which has not been received very well in Europe. And then, of course, there are mixed signals on Taiwan. There is a rhetoric on Canada, Greenland, Panama Canal, Gulf of Mexico, and possibly there is a talk of a new modus vivendi with China. So, despite a very successful bilateral visit between India and the United States of America, which shows promise of taking our bilateral trade by 2030 to $500 billion and a boost in the defense cooperation, buying high-end military equipment, energy supply, cooperation in AI, space, big data analytics. But there are still many imponderables which need to be addressed. And therefore, I think we have a very nicely stitched panel wherein we would be looking at some of these macro issues and what are the challenges and what are the opportunities in this relationship. I think we would be looking forward to expert opinion on all this. So without further ado, I hand over the proceedings back to Dr. Dyamchi.
Thank you very much indeed, Major General Sharma. Our first session is on strategic balancing of China, because no dialogue between US and India is complete without involving the China factor. Our first speaker on this issue is Mr. Ron Alido. He will be speaking on geopolitics of Indo-Pacific, its strategic implications and responses. Mr. Ron Alido is a former military and security and intelligence officer who wrote intelligence products for White House. He was advisor to President Obama. He has been a former CIA intelligence analyst, joint staff, intelligence and operation officers in Pentagon. Currently, he resides in Miami and he is CEO of Miami Intelligence Agency, a strategy, intelligence, geopolitics, and security consulting firm. He was DHS at a level of colonel and was involved in international security consulting, risk reduction, negotiation, strategy. He's a US Army veteran. He worked also as an advisor for Afghan National Police in Kabul. He was Director of International Cooperation Office at DHS Mexico, coordinated intelligence and law enforcement in Mexico. So without further ado, I will invite Mr. Ron Alido to make his presentation. Ron, you have only 15 minutes. Kindly stick to timeline because we have a packed agenda. And I hope that you will be able to talk on this topic of Indo-Pacific geopolitics. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen real fast, if I'm able to. Sadly, I don't think I'm going to be able to share my screen. Do I need some permission? Let me see. Maybe I am. Give me 1 second.
You have permission now.
Okay. No, I don't think I have it. Permission to share my screen.
You have been made a presenter. You should be able to share the screen.
Give me 1 second. Let me see. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Can you see my presentation?
Can you make it full size?
Yes. Can you see it?
It's a miniature version.
Yes, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Thank you very much for the invitation. I know that I'm have very limited time, so I'm going to go very fast. And perhaps later on, I can do some extra additional comment. So I'm going to talk about, thank you very much for the presentation, for the introduction. I'm going to talk about first, real fast, before I go into Southwest Asia and China. I have to mention, because it's extremely important to mention, that if we want to understand Trump point two, we need to understand the speech that the Vice President J.D. Vance gave yesterday in Munich. It's extremely important, it's historical. And the reason why this is very important is because never have been done before. It had never done before that the Vice President of the United States blast the chief of state, the ministers, the prime ministers, the presidents of the European countries in their face. That they tell them how bad they are about freedoms, how bad they are about persecuting their own people, about censoring their own people. That had never been done before. And it was done in your face, in front of them. He was the main speaker, he was the honor speaker. And in front of them, they told him, you are doing a terrible job. You suck, basically. And this tells us how aggressive the Trump administration as a whole is going to be during the next 4 years. The first 4 years of the Trump administration, foreign affairs, international relations, engagement with other countries, was very shy, very quiet. Trump did not know exactly where to go. That he did not really have good advisors in that sector. That's why he got the advisor of John Bolton, because, hey, John Bolton knows about geopolitics and international. Okay, let's bring him. But it was a disaster because John Bolton had a completely world view different from Trump. But now he's ready. Now he's going to be very aggressive. Now is all glove off. Is glove off. I mean, he's going to be extremely aggressive, extremely assertive, extremely confident in foreign relations. And the speech that Vance gave yesterday in Munich is just a sign of that. And the fact that after the speech, he met with the opposition leader in Germany, with Alice Weidel, with the Alternative for Deutschland leader, that tells us that they are not afraid, that Trump and Vance, they are not afraid to go in your face with the international leader. That was taboo before. You never can support or have any relationship with the opposition member. But this was I don't care about you, Chancellor Scholz. That was basically what it meant. And this tells us that the whole international relations and foreign affairs agenda of Trump and Vance during the next 4 years is going to be extremely aggressive. Again, he blasted yesterday the European leaders in their face. They told them, you are terrible, in their face. So we can expect more aggressive action like that during the next 4 years.
Ron, you are sharing a wrong screen. Just check what screen you're sharing.
Okay, you cannot see the blast.
We are not seeing your slides.
Okay, what about this? Can you see this? Can you see the picture of President Trump and Mr. Modi?
No.
No?
No.
Okay, that's very sad. Okay, I'm gonna try one more time to share. If not, then I'm gonna continue without sharing anything.
Okay.
Let me see. I'm trying to share. But, okay, what about now? Can you see it now?
Yes, we see now.
Okay. So what I was saying is this. This is what I was talking about. Yesterday's speech was historic. He blasted the European leaders in their face. They told them how terrible they are, how bad they are. And immediately he went to meet with the opposition leader, with the Alternative for Deutschland opposition leader, Alice Weidel. That had never been done before. That was taboo, but he did it. This tells us that these 4 years is going to be extremely powerful, extremely strong, extremely assertive. So now, let's talk about India and Trump. I think India and Trump, they see each other very well because they have the two leaders, Mr. Modi, President Trump, they have very similar ideologies. I mean, from different perspectives, of course, from the Hindu and India perspective, from the Western perspective, but they are very patriotic, very nationalistic views. So they see each other very well. They respect each other very well, their world views, their ideologies. And obviously, they are partners in containing China for different reasons. Trump, mostly in the economic sector, but India in the military sector. And obviously, they want to increase trade and decrease tariff. They have a mutual relationship, India and the United States. The United States look for investments. They are a partner, again, in containing, in keeping China control, let's going to call it that way. The United States have opened the visas for many years now, since many years, for Indian investors to come from Mumbai, to come from India and invest here, create jobs, create new companies. So that's something extraordinary that have been done for the last 10, 15 years. And obviously the Indian medical doctors, they are a classic culture already. How many and how often and how big is the contribution of the Indian people in the health industry in the United States. President Trump have very good relationships with India. Remember what happened a few years ago. Donald Trump was received like a hero in India, and he likes that. The people of India like him. Mr. Modi obviously is respecting and welcoming him very well, very good. So that tells us how good the relationship is, how warm, how close the relationship is between the two countries, and personally between Trump and Mr. Modi. During the recent trip, just 2 days ago, there was an agreement to increase trade, partnership in many areas, space, travel, artificial intelligence, etc., etc. And they want to increase, I mean, right now it's $129 billion in trade. They want to increase that to $500 billion. Also, military trade. The military alliance is strong. They want to increase the military cooperation between the two countries. Major partnership in defense, expand U.S. defense sales to India, weapon system, etc., etc., etc. That is going to be very strong during the next year. And the Mission 500 is that they want to increase the United States and India up to $500 billion trade by the year 2030. That's basically, and also they want to start a bilateral trade agreement. Those are very important milestones in the relationship. Now, some issues that are in the Southwest Asia. What is going to happen to Pakistan? What is going to happen to the Pakistan alliance with China? Obviously, the former Prime Minister Khan, he's have tons of legal problems, tons of judicial problems. Most of these problems are created by the Pakistani army. They dislike him. They did not like him. Biden did not like Khan neither because he saw him like too close to Russia. And basically he did not really want him there. So Biden gave green light to the Pakistani army to create all these judicial cases and court cases, very similar to what happened to Mr. Trump here in the United States, with all the political opponents trying to go after him in court. But let's see what is going to happen. He refuses to surrender, Mr. Khan, even from jail, even from all the judicial problem that he has. And again, the army cooperation between China and Pakistan is very strong. They have a very strong relationship, economic relationship, military relationship, and obviously that's something that India will have to look, and the United States will have to also measure during the next 4 years. Another issue that is very strong, Taiwan. let's go and understand something. Trump is not happy with Taiwan. Trump is very different from Biden. Biden said, even said, taboo. He said, we will support Taiwan militarily if China invades. We will defend Taiwan. So that's something that broke the status quo. But Trump also is breaking the status quo because he really said, I don't care about Taiwan. Basically, that's what he said. He's not happy with Taiwan about the semiconductors and the chips industry. He, when they asked him, he will not say he will defend Taiwan or not. He said a very ambiguous answer. I would prefer that they don't do that they don't attack, but he will never say that. And he actually has been very aggressive against Taiwan. He said that Taiwan stole the industry from the United States, that Taiwan is not a fair player. He's very angry. He said that Taiwan is affecting in a negative way the American, the United States economy. So those are very strong signs that Trump doesn't have a very strong feeling about defending Taiwan. So he might even don't really care. I mean, or if he cares very little about a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. I mean, and we can see now that he also have a very different vision between Russia and Ukraine. He really don't want a victory of Ukraine. He really don't want to support with more money and more weapons Ukraine. He wants to stop the war in Ukraine and Russia as soon as possible. So he have a very dismissive way of defending Taiwan. Now, what can China do with Taiwan? They can do an invasion, but that's very unlikely. Most experts said that they will need at least 3 to 4 years to increase the size and capabilities of their navy. They can do a blockade, but that's also dangerous. If they do a blockade, an active blockade of the port and of the island, because that might put them at odds with not only the United States Navy, if the United States Navy wants to break the blockade, with other navies that want to come in and support and defend Taiwan. So that's a very risky way. Another more probable way that China can, make Taiwan surrender is not by an active blockade, but a port destruction. If China have, let's say, 2,000 hypersonic missiles that they're willing to use to destroy the ports, the civilian ports and the energy terminals and all the industrial ports of Taiwan, then Taiwan will have to surrender. It's an island. It is not like Ukraine. Ukraine have a very big border with Poland and a very big border with Romania, and those borders save Ukraine because a lot of equipment, supplies, etc., came through those borders. Taiwan don't have those borders. It's an island. Without its ports, it's gonna starve. Without ports, it cannot do trade, it cannot do commerce, nothing can come in, nothing can come out. It's going to be a terrible situation. So if China destroy the ports of Taiwan, China will have a very powerful hand to dictate terms with Taiwan, the destruction of the ports. But again, we do not know how much Mr. Trump is going to defend them. I think that the situation with Russia is going to continue even more now. Biden administration put a lot of pressure on India to be cold to Russia, to reject Mr. Putin, to reject Russia. Mr. Modi said, I don't really care. I'm going to keep doing my relationship with Russia because they are good friends for many years. But now Trump most likely doesn't care. He will really not care if Modi have a very good relationship with Russia. All that pressure that the Biden administration put on Modi is gone, is out. So now we can see also the relationship with Russia and India to increase in a very positive way. Again, this goes economic, but also military cooperation between India and Russia. The American elites, they were very angry at India because they said that they were very warm to Russia. But again, this is useless now. This is OBE. This is gone because now with Trump on power, he really don't care what the American elites think. And he wants to have a good relationship with India, he's going to have it. And if India wants to have a good relationship with Russia, he really don't care. That pressure is over. And of course, India will keep an independent international relations like the foreign minister of India have been saying for years. We are going to defend Indians' interests. We're going to look the world from a third viewpoint, from a third viewpoint of understanding geopolitics. We are not in this side, we are not in that side, we are in India's side. So that is very important to dictate how India is going to follow an independent policy during the next years. Thank you very much for your time. And I'm sorry that at the beginning the PowerPoint did not work. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Can you stop your PowerPoint? Thank you, Ron. Our next speaker would be Major General R.S. Yadav, and he is going to speak on China's strategic behavior in India's neighborhood, implications and response. Major General Yadav is President's awardee from prestigious National Defense Academy, NDA, at Khadagwasla. He was commissioned into coveted Rajputana Rifles Regiment Infantry. He superannuated on December 31st, 2017, after 30 years of glorious service to nation and Indian Army. He has commanded an infantry division, served on all active borders with Pakistan and China, and has rich operational experience in counter-terrorism operations. He was awarded VSM, Vishish Seva Medal, by the President of India. He has served as Defense Attaché of India in Indian embassies in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Yemen. He has rich experience of military diplomacy and international relations. He is currently Director, Center for Strategic Studies and Simulation at United Services Institution of India in New Delhi. He is a prolific writer on strategic issues and specializes in net assessment, scenario building, strategic gaming, and geostrategic assessment and international affairs. He is a regular participant in a number of think tanks and media outlets. Welcome, Major General Yadav. The floor is yours. Please take 15 minutes and no more.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanji, for introducing me, and greetings to all the listeners, because we are all in different time zones. The topic, am I audible, please? Okay.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So the topic which has been given to me is China's strategic behavior. And this I would like to cover in the backdrop as to what is likely to happen between the US-Indo relationship, as to how this factor matters. Now, the thing which is very obvious is that China is guided by national prestige. Having said that it suffered a century of humiliation, it has put a target in front of itself that by 2049, it is going to emerge as a global power. And all the in-between timelines which it has put to itself, it has been meeting those timelines well in advance. Having taken about 3 to 4 decades to build itself peacefully, it has now got the economic muscle and it has got the military muscle to push its agenda ahead. And that's what exactly China is now doing. So whether it is Taiwan, because that forms part of the first island chain, whether it is South China Sea, that is the area it wants for itself to fan out, and whether it is the BRI projects and other initiatives that it has launched across the globe, it is creating space for itself. But what we need to understand is that for any global power, there is a requirement for them to stretch out on all the seas across. You would all agree that while it has got 22,000 kilometers of land borders, I think it does not have an outlet on any side. Its 14,000 plus coastline is also 2/3 covered by the first island chain. So what China is doing at the moment, it is a strategic need. It has to open up its eastern seaboard for it to become a global power. What it is doing westwards on the continent side is, so whether it is CPEC, it is CMEC, or any of the transcontinental pathways which is wanting to develop, is to have options backwards as a backup and opening into other seas. So therefore, what China is doing at the moment seems unstoppable, because that is the strategic need it will push, and it is pushing full throttle. Wherever it can use money, it is luring people with the economic power. Wherever it needs to, uh, uh, you know, uh, put people under pressure, is like Taiwan. It is doing that. It is doing the same thing to India, because that is the challenger. And it is going around with the information warfare, and it is infiltrating each and every network in various countries. So what are the roadblocks? There are two roadblocks. One is the US, because US wants to maintain the global domination. So therefore, if it lets China expand, it is possible that US position is going to dilute, which may not be acceptable to the US. And therefore, the policy of all the affiliations which are taking place, so whether it is Quad, AUKUS, or anything, they want to contain China. And India happens to be an important partner, is seen to be an important partner there. Right. The second person is India, because India is the main competitor and is seen as a challenger by China. So therefore, India is one of the targets of China to be kept under pressure, so that it does not emerge to that level that it can challenge the aspirations of China. Now, what is China doing to do this with regard to India? It is following a two-pronged strategy, as per me. That one is direct. It is, you all know that China has initiated the five finger concept, in which it claims Ladakh, it claims Nepal, it claims Bhutan, it claims Arunachal Pradesh and everything. It is naming various places in India with Chinese names. It is damming the rivers. It is doing various cyber attacks. Shell companies have been traced back to China. There is a trade surplus. It is now obstructing shifting of the factories from China to this place. The Apple industry, which is coming up in Karnataka, it is restricting the Chinese manpower coming from there, and such other things are taking place. On the military side, to put direct pressure, 2013 Chumar in Ladakh, 2017 Doklam in eastern part of India, and 2020 Galwan. And what it wants now, having made a statement that we will disengage, the process is going to be very long drawn, because disengagement is only the first part. It has to demobilize and possibly revert back to the positions of April 2020. Until as that happens, the military pressure from China on India is going to continue. So the second prong is that apart from doing things directly, China is also pressurizing all Indian neighbors. Pakistan, I think we already discussed that Pakistan is a strategic partner. CPEC is going through it, and it is getting closer by the day. It has put Nepal under pressure. There are some boundary issues. It made Nepal raise the Kalapani issue. It is wanting a corridor to Nepal. Bhutan is under pressure to cede territory. Doklam, we have already seen through. So that is there. In Myanmar, China is having a good hand, that it is supporting the opposition groups, and there are indications that they are supporting things into India also. Bangladesh, whatever has happened, so whatever we may call it, whether it was a deep state from the US or otherwise, China was amongst the first one to recognize the opposition. Sri Lanka, we all know, Hambantota, visits of the various ships, service ships, intelligence ships. Maldives, we have gone through a turmoil that almost the president, went to China. It evicted the Indians, but now it has come back. So again, the situation remains this thing. As far as Indian Ocean is concerned, there is an increased presence of Chinese ships and vessels into the IOR. It has got almost about 20 to 22 dual use facilities which it is creating. So all these things are going to continue. So summing it, that China is exerting pressure on India to keep it in its place, and that has to be resisted so that we can stand up and be strategic autonomy. Now, coming to what can be done. So therefore, India needs to have a strategic deterrence in place if it has to be. We can't be meeting an eye for an eye because there is a tremendous asymmetry between India and China. So therefore, we ought to have and plan for a minimum strategic deterrence. The second thing is that there is a need to immediate decouple the security forces, security apparatus, communications, and IT, which can have a long-term impact. There is also a need to gradual de-risking of the supply chains. These are the three things which India needs to be doing. Now, in light of this, how does Indo-US relationship pan out? I think President Trump has made 3-4 things very clear. It is ready to do global policing and security, but everybody will have to pay and contribute for it. He is not going to share the load. No unnecessary aid will be given. US aid is discontinued by the executive order, but there are court problems. Reciprocal tariffs are going to be imposed. There is going to be no adverse balance acceptable. Illegal immigration is going to be stopped. So therefore, what comes out mainly is that it is going to be a transactional approach. I think the a person before me, Mr. Ron, has already alluded to all these things, that it is going to be strong. Now, if we see that do the interests or do we gel, if we see there are more commonalities between India and US on which we agree and less things to disagree. So where do we agree? Strategic concern regards China, we agree. Ukraine war to be stopped, we agree. Indo-Pacific region to be free and open, we agree. However, we may not agree to the military point of Quad. Taiwan, South China Sea, international rule-based order, we agree. West Asia, Abraham Accords, we agree. Saudi-Iran rapprochement, we agree. Indian Middle East European corridor, we agree. What is the difference? Very minor differences. Adverse trade, in case certain supplies come, I think that adverse trade of 45 billions is hardly anything. Illegal immigrants, India has already said that we will be ready to accept them back. Supporting, not supporting US sanctions, that US has to understand that we being a country with not very many resources, we will go for what available is cheap and meet our requirements. So that little concession India ought to be getting. As regards the Palestinian state, we have supported a two-nation this thing, but there is an ambiguity on the US side now with the statements which have been made about Gaza. So these are very minimal irritants which could be there. But what needs to be understood is that since 2002 onwards, when comprehensive strategic partnership was declared by the US, we have gone through almost 2 decades. We have done 8 to 10 agreements, various agreements have happened, but the question always comes, what have been the deliverables? There is a problem that you agree on something, but it doesn't come. So if that be so, that is going to be the difficult area, because India today is in dire need. It has to protect its territorial integrity. It has to emerge out of the shadows and do that for the welfare of its people. So therefore, I feel that the US ought to be doing hand-holding. And one last sentence, that Mr. Ron Aldo has also said that new things have started emerging with President Trump coming in. Russia, US, India. Because they want to be friends with Russia also. Pressure is not going to be there. So is it going to come up? There is another school of thought. Is RIC going to come up on the other side as a challenge to it? And how are we going? So actually India is in a bind. It will have to do a tightrope walking. It is not wanting to go against the US interest, neither it can go against the Russian interests or our mutual interests. So therefore, the days ahead are going to be, I will not say tricky, but ought to be taken carefully so that all the needs are met and India is, helped by the US in its growth further. I think I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, General Yadav. Our last presentation on strategic balancing of China would be done by Professor Sen Ni. Professor Sen Ni is currently in Taiwan. He retired after 40 years of service as Professor of Mechanical Engineering at Catholic University of America. He started actually as Assistant Professor in CUA after completing his PhD in 1983. He served as chair of the Mechanical Engineering Department 5 times at CUA. As a researcher, Professor Sen Ni published more than 100 scientific research papers and served as PI on a number of funded research projects. He is also interested in religious freedom, human rights, and China-related affairs. He has well spoken on various platforms. Currently, he is Professor Emeritus at Catholic University of America. He is also Fellow of Center of Human Rights, Human Ecology Institute at Catholic University of America. He is an adjunct professor of engineering at Yuanzi University in Taiwan, and he will be speaking on the state of Chinese economy, because we cannot really talk about strategic balancing of China without taking into consideration the state of Chinese economy, because it will have impact on China's strategic behavior. Professor Sen Ni, you have 15 minutes to make your presentation, sir. Welcome to our platform.
Thank you, Dr. Dianji, for your nice introductions. The topic I was asked to talk about today is the state of China's economy. From the perspective of general trend, China's economy continues to deteriorate and the growth slows down significantly. The economic environment is getting worse and worse, including the real estate crisis, a very high unemployment, continued sluggish consumptions, and large local government debts, and accelerated withdrawal of foreign investments. China claims its economic growth, or GDP, last year was 5%, but many experts questioned calculated from published data and pointed out that the real growth rate of China's economy is likely to be only 2% or less. Some think 0% or even a negative number. The CCP still sets a GDP growth target of 5% for this year, 2025. What is the real situation of China's economy this year and in the near future? In my observations, there are 6 major gray rhinos in China's economy, which I am going to discuss one by one. Number 1, real estate crisis. Recently, the sales data released by Bigui Yuan, the China's largest real estate company, showed that its sales in the past month's January were only 2.3 billion Chinese dollar, a 36% decrease from the previous month's December, and 59% plunge from a year ago last January. Data show that in the first half of the year, China's real estate development investment dropped by more than 10%. The sales volume of newly built housing dropped by 25%. House prices in Beijing and other places have plummeted. The oversupply in entire real estate industry in China is very serious. China's real estate has faced with a rapid decline since 2020. The sales performance has shrunk significantly for 3 consecutive years. So the real estate crisis is ever ongoing. Sales volume and house prices have plummeted and the market is in chaos. This is one of the main reasons for the current economic difficulties. Number 2, local government debts. The total debts of China's central and local government was 147 trillion Chinese dollar, about 20 trillion US dollar last year, which amounts to more than 100%, actually 117% of its GDP. Of the nearly 2,900 local government financial platforms evaluated, only 1/5, 20%, had enough cash to pay short-term debts and interest. The scale of urban investment bond defaults is approximately $800 billion, reaching a record high. It is causing the bankruptcy of local governments. Among them, Heilongjiang, Xinjiang, Tianjin, and Guizhou have increased the debt ratio most significantly, all exceeding 400%. Number 3, unemployment problems. China's unemployment is very serious, which CCP claimed to be only 15%. However, the statistics of China's unemployment rate is calculated differently from those around the world. People who work more than 1 hour a week are considered employed in China. But in other countries, people who worked less than 15 hours a week will generally be counted as unemployed. Also, China only calculated urban unemployment data. The urban labor supply is mainly of young graduates, plus 300 million migrant workers from rural farmland. But these migrant workers are not counted in the CCP's urban unemployment survey. In fact, credible Chinese economists reported that the youth unemployment rate was actually as high as 47%, close to 50%, a half. For example, last year, the number of college graduates in China hits a new record high of about 12 million students. This youth unemployment wave has lasted for more than 3 years now. There are about 96 million urban residents in China aged from 16 to 24. About half of them are in school. About 1/3, 33 million, are not working or looking for work. If young people not in school, not employed, and not in training classes are all included, China's youth unemployment rate would be as high as 47%. Finding a job is difficult. More and more college students has become full-time child at home, paid by the parents. Many are forced to work part-time on odd jobs, self-media, or so-called flexible employment, such as a speedy delivery, Panda Food, and Uber Taxi. The fact is that 30% of delivery boys today in China are now college graduates, and many Uber taxi drivers speak English very well with college educations. So for the 22 million unemployed young people in China, they will cause other social and political problems in addition to economic issues. It could evolve into an explosion of dissatisfactions and riots with the CCP regime. And these high unemployment rates probably won't be alleviated for another decades to come. Number 4, consumption issues. In recent years, the middle class of the society has faced with escalated crises such as salary cuts, layoffs, unemployment, and living with insecurity. So the number of middle class continues to decline rapidly, and the number of people at the bottom has substantially increased. Those people are afraid of buying and spending money. Consumption in the society has continued to downgrade. The stimulus measures by the government has not been effective. The plight of China's middle class is dragging down the Chinese economy. For example, an owner of a piano factory said that the piano market collapsed, and more than half of the piano factories closed down. Pianos that used to cost 50,000 Chinese dollar are now sold as low as 5,000. Piano sales and piano lessons drop off a cliff and seems to disappear overnight. Number 5, withdrawal of foreign investments. Since the beginning of the Sino-US trade war in 2018 and the 3-year COVID-19 epidemic lockdown and zero tolerance since 2020, a large number of export orders have been lost and export business have been transferred, resulting in the accelerated withdrawal of foreign investments. Foreign investment dropped to 136 billion US dollars in 2023, which is a 28% decrease from the previous year, and further drop below 100 billion dollars in 2024. Again, a decrease of 27%. So for 3 consecutive years, plummeting foreign investment by nearly 30% every year shows the largest decline in the past 3 decades. The trend of accelerating withdrawal of foreign investments have been going on for several years, and there is no sign of stopping or reverting. The last, number 6, adverse international relations. China's international relations continues to deteriorate for many reasons, and the pace of deterioration is ever increasing. The initial tariffs imposed by President Trump on China recently were to increase by another 10% across the board. But his target is actually 60%. If a bad situation occurs, the overall tariff rate may be increased to 100% or even 200%. The US accounts for 30% of the world's total consumer goods, and more than 85% of China's foreign exchange surplus over the past 20 years has come from the US. So, raising tariffs on China will cause a significant shrinkage in exports from China and its Belt and Road countries. If the US chooses to implement 100% tariffs, it will immediately cause China's foreign exchange reserves to be quickly and massively depleted. The US has various flexible tools to exert influence on Chinese market and trade through economic, financial, monetary, and technological means. Trump's second-term tariff policy has not been relaxed yet. Rather, it will be increased. So, in addition to the 6 acute problems mentioned above, China also has its own political system problems and population aging problems and others. China does not have the condition to resist the US tariff stick. In response to the trade war, CCP officials have been advocating the combination of internal and external economic circulations for several years. But now they can only place emphasis on the internal economic circulation. However, this internal circulation is just a wishful thinking and often ridiculed by the experts as the last resort of closing the country away. Finally, the CCP's authoritarian system with its powerful political grip and comprehensive brainwashing will push back its economic difficulties mentioned above and accumulate problems. So, in summary, regarding the state of China's economy, the CCP will continue to hide and whitewash it and seeing the bright side, saying that its economic situation is promising and good. But in reality, China's economic situation and difficulty will only become more serious this year and in the near future, and most likely can never be recovered. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Sen Ni. We know that Chinese economy is going through headwinds. Now we go to the second part of our webinar, which is US-India collaboration. And I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Walter Anderson, who was born in New York City, awarded a doctorate in political science by University of Chicago, did postdoctoral work at Northwestern University in developmental economics. He taught at College of Worcester before moving to Washington, D.C. to work in office of a congressperson from Ohio. Then he joined Department of State. He was posted as an advisor to American Embassy in New Delhi, as an advisor to ambassador. Subsequently, he also taught at South Asian Studies at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Affairs, from where he retired as director of South Asia Studies Center. He has written extensively on Indian politics, international relations of South Asia, Indo-US relations. He has also written a couple of books on RSS. I'm very pleased to say that he has appeared on our platform several times before. And keeping in view Mr. Modi's visit and catalytic impetus given to bilateral relationship, Professor Walter Anderson's talk on economics, commerce, bilateral trade, etc., would be very timely. Sir, the platform is yours. Please keep confined yourself to 15 minutes, and please unmute yourself. Professor Anderson, please unmute yourself. You're muted, sir. Please unmute yourself, sir.
Walter, you have to unmute yourself.
It was sort of hidden behind a kind of advertisement. Okay, thank you. Well, let me start since there's limited time, and I've been asked to talk about the geopolitical calculations in the U.S. relationship with India, particularly with some focus on the economic factor as a key ingredient. And I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to a platform which I have participated in before, as was noted, and I've always found it very interesting and informative to do so, including the one today. The largely favorable reaction by both Republicans and Democrats, as well as the extensive and positive news coverage to the recent visit of Prime Minister Modi, is a suggestion that underscores the importance of India to U.S. policymakers on the Indian role in world affairs. There are problems, however, and I will note some of the challenges from an assertive Trump administration, particularly on trade issues. This generally favorable relationship is in sharp contrast to the roller coaster nature of the relationship from India's independence in 1947 until the early 1990s. What shaped the new outlook, at least for the U.S., was India's adoption of economic reforms in the early 1990s when George W. Bush was president, and which triggered a robust growth in the Indian economy. At that time, when India adopted these reforms, I was assigned to handle political reporting for the U.S. Embassy in India, and we could sense at that time the growing interest of policymakers in both Washington and New Delhi to the advantages of a robust bilateral relationship. There have been some, obviously, problems, as there is with all countries. We have problems with Canada as well. But the Indian advantage was, based on real sensibility regarding the potential of India in a kind of assumption on strategic strategy that I'll talk about in a few minutes. The Indian government at that time began to reduce the state's regulatory powers and encourage private enterprise. Coupled with the growing Indian and U.S. perception of threats from an assertive China, there was a mutual sense of a closer relationship that also had a security dimension. But there were other factors beside the China factor, such as India's robust economy, its stable democracy, and its equally critical and critically important geographic location bordering on East and Southeast Asia to the north, and to the east, being a peninsula jutting down 1,500 miles into the middle of the Indian Ocean, gave it an importance geopolitical potential for the U.S. policymakers. From the presidency of George W. Bush, 2001 to 2009, the U.S. has bolstered Indian military capabilities, and this is quite important, on the assumption that a stronger India is in the U.S. interest, regarding whether or not India had a military alliance with the U.S. While this assumption has a pedigree that goes back to the late 1970s, it was only when the Indian economy began to take off at that time, in the 1990s, when it adopted reforms, that there was a U.S. appreciation of India's potentially important role in world affairs, and particularly critically regarding China. The Indian economy grew significantly. The GDP went from $217 billion in 1991 to $3.7 trillion in 2024. And it is estimated that it could reach $6.3 trillion in 2030, or $13 trillion in purchasing power parity. In the past 20 years, the GDP growth rate has been between 6 and 9%, and is projected by the World Bank to be 6.6% in calendar year 2025, though economists maintain it must average about 9% growth for the next 20 years to achieve the social objectives of the government, that is, to become a developed economy with a much expanded middle class. While with this faster economic growth, Indian policymakers began to pay attention to a country, U.S. policymakers, began to pay attention to a country that by 2025 was economically the fastest growing among major countries in the world. And India now has the world's 5th largest economy and seems destined to be the 4th largest, perhaps even the 3rd largest within the next 10 years. This growth is made possible by huge expenditures and what had been a leaky infrastructure system. And much of this expansion has been funded by innovative private-public cooperation. India has also purchased more commercial aircraft, largely by 2 companies, largely by Indigo and Indian Airlines, than any other country, and along with this, a proliferation of new airports. In addition, India possesses an impressive military structure that has the financial means now to manufacture and import state-of-the-art equipment. The administration of Joe Biden enthusiastically backed the assumption that a strong India suited U.S. interests in constraining China, and it was prone to do so because of long-standing disputes with its northern neighbor. The U.S. therefore cooperated with India over the past 3 decades to hold joint naval, air, and land military exercises, sold sophisticated military equipment such as combat helicopters, and most recently, a $4 billion agreement to supply combat drones. These sales brought military sales from the U.S. since 2008 to about $25 billion, about 11% of India's recent military purchases, though the U.S. is still far behind Russia's supply of about 60% of India's military purchases. In addition, India cooperated to create the so-called Quad, including India, the U.S., Australia, and Japan, a pillar of cooperative regional strategy that now possesses a security element, especially regarding the Indo-Pacific region. The U.S. did all this while remaining relatively quiet about India's continuing reluctance to condemn Moscow's ongoing aggression of Ukraine, the Indian purchase of substantial amounts of sanctioned Russian oil and gas, and thirdly, suspicion that the Indian government was somehow involved in targeting Khalistani separatists in Canada and the U.S. The chances are good that the new Trump administration will also subscribe to this strategic assumption, and that has 2 core elements. First, a strong India suits U.S. strategic interests, and second, an assertive China that threatens India and the U.S. will tip India towards U.S. strategic goals. Modi and Trump, who both put great store on personal relations in the conduct of diplomacy, have a history of amicable relations. Soon after Trump's inauguration on January 20th, 2025, the U.S. president signaled his adherence to the U.S. strategic assumption by inviting Modi to visit the U.S. on February 12-13. One of the first major policymakers from overseas to make an official visit to the U.S. was Prime Minister Modi. The groundwork for all this was laid by the External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar, who's sitting in the front row for those of you who watched the inauguration, attended the swearing-in ceremonies of President Trump held in the Capitol Rotunda. He took advantage of the occasion to hold consultations with the newly appointed Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and he attended the first Quad summit of the U.S. administration. Soon after, Trump and Modi had a lengthy telephone conversation where the U.S. president apparently focused on issues of trade and immigration, issues where there is some issue with India, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. On trade, where India has a $45 billion advantage of the $119 billion in U.S. bilateral trade, including both manufacturing and services, Trump has complained about what he calls India's unfair and high trade tariffs on U.S. goods, specifically naming Harley-Davidson and other high-end motorcycles as an example of that. And let me just give you one thing that the U.S. policymakers are looking at when they talk about the difficulties with trade with India. Indian tariffs average about 14% compared to 6.5% for China and 1.8% for Canada. This makes India vulnerable to Trump's threat of a reciprocal U.S. tariff regime, though I saw in the paper today that the U.S. is planning to sort of study this, and it involves a tremendous amount of effort to find out what it would be. So that will be several months in the future. Trump called on India specifically to buy more U.S. arms as well as more oil and gas to help close the trade gap. Almost certainly in response to U.S. concerns, India has recently moved to reduce tariffs on a range of U.S. products, including significant reduction on motorcycles and heavy-duty bicycles, as well as considering the purchase of more oil and gas from the U.S. On undocumented immigrants, it is estimated there may be as many as 750,000 undocumented illegal Indian immigrants in the U.S. On February 5th, the first batch of 104 illegal immigrants, Indian immigrants, landed in Amritsar and more on the way. Prime Minister Modi and External Affairs Minister Jaishankar have stated publicly that India would accept back those who entered the U.S. illegally, and this got tremendous coverage in the government and approval and approving comments by the U.S. president. On another immigration-related issue of critical importance to India is H-1B visa, that is a temporary immigration visa to fill certain desired categories of work. Most of these visas were awarded to Indians, and many Indian engineering and technical graduates worry that Trump may drastically reduce the number of visas that are issued. We should get a more complete readout of the Trump-Modi meetings that took place a few days back, and we'll be in a better position to judge if India was able to maneuver around the demands of Trump regarding his trade and immigration concerns. The challenges for India are significant. One, the U.S. demand for increased arms purchases. The priority demands it's conflicted by the priority demands on economic development, including in Indian budgets, including the most recent budget that was submitted. And that means there are constraints about how much India can afford to buy, and the expensive price tags on sophisticated U.S. military equipment places a further burden on India in terms of meeting this desire of the new Trump administration. Secondly, on immigration, it may be difficult to constrain illegal movement of Indians into a thriving U.S. economy, where there are areas where there are gaps in terms of jobs to fill. Moreover, the negative image of tens of thousands of Indians forced back to India could create significant bilateral tensions, as witnessed by the criticism of only 140 arriving back in shackles. The major challenge, however, is the mutual distance on strategic goals regarding China. The U.S., for its part, would like the Indian military to cooperate with the U.S. in an integrated fashion should hostilities break out between the U.S. and China. and a war situation could arise if China carries out its threats to militarily seize Taiwan, which it considers part of China. In a situation less than war with China, however, both the U.S. and India seem content with joint exercises, and the U.S. providing sophisticated weapons that strengthen India. India, for its part, however, rejects the notion of military integration that would jeopardize its strategic autonomy and thus potentially find itself facing a hostile and militarily stronger China. For example, India has consistently rejected the idea of an integrated military response outside a U.S. umbrella arrangement, and that, in my view, will continue to do so unless India is directly threatened by China. The current Modi-Trump talks will give us some clue about how well India is balancing the U.S. desire to maintain an assumption of strategic integration with the Indian policy of opposing such strategic integration. So far, Modi and his brilliant External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar, have been able to balance these concerns. The other challenges on immigration and trade are difficult and could create tensions, but they are manageable, as demonstrated by India's recent decisions on these issues. This is where the personal links of Modi and Trump are important for two leaders who consider personal relations very important in their decision-making. It's a good start, and the meetings they had, from what little has been reported, indicates that there was a good start between the two men. But a key issue will be how each responds to threats from China, particularly if the situation should deteriorate significantly. Thank you. Appreciate for being here.
Thank you, Professor Anderson, for a very balanced state of affairs in bilateral relationships, opportunities and challenges. Now, in the last session of this webinar, joint webinar, it is my honor and privilege to introduce Lieutenant General Anil Ahuja, who is going to be our last speaker, and he will be speaking on technologies and defense collaboration. Lieutenant General Ahuja is a former Deputy Chief of Integrated Defense Staff for Policy Planning and Force Development. He has extensive operational experience in India's northern and eastern theaters and has commanded a corps along the northern borders. He was founding co-chair of India-US Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, so-called DTTI, Interagency Task Force, and has been the Secretary of Defense Acquisition Council during periods of 2014 to 2016. He has been India's defense attaché to Vietnam and Cambodia, Laos, and was also a UN military observer in Angola. Post-superannuation from service in August of 2016, he has been a member of the United Services Institution of India. He has served on the Executive Council for 2 terms. He writes regularly on issues related to defense capability and development and India-US defense relations. So it's my honor and pleasure to invite Lieutenant General Anil Ahuja. Sir, the platform is yours and you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Adityanji, and greetings to all my co-panelists and other participants. Now, I have been asked to speak on the aspect related to India-US defense and technology cooperation. Now, in the short time available, let me touch on 2 key aspects. Number 1, where do we stand in our defense relationship today? Oh, well, I'll not say today, I'll say day before yesterday. That is as on 13th February 2025, when Prime Minister Modi and President Trump have met. And the second aspect I wish to cover is, what do we need to do to maintain or accelerate the momentum? Now, for all our audience, before I start, I wish to flag 3 very fundamental issues for your better understanding of how we do and why we do it. First of all, when we talk of India-US defense cooperation as a major defense partner within the ambit of comprehensive global strategic partnership. We include a large spectrum. We include mill-to-mill cooperation. We include defense trade and technology cooperation. Now, this trade includes acquisition of military hardware from US of approximately $25 billion post 2008, and from India's side, export of nearly 50% of India's defense exports of approximately 21,000 crores or about $2.5 billion, 50% going to the US. So that's about trade. Then we talk of Defense Industrial Roadmap, which was formulated June last year, Innovation Bridge, IndusX, and supply chain resilience. So all this and more constitutes our defense cooperation. The second aspect is our priority of developing our partnerships is to build our own capability at our own cost to fight with our own boots on ground. Perhaps this may answer a point that Dr. Anderson just alluded to before me, that why India would not like to get integrated like other allies. Here lies the answer. And three, our policy regarding the defense capability development is balancing capability development between maritime and continental domain, because for us, the continental domain is an existential threat for us. So now, coming to defense cooperation, the foundation for this cooperation started getting laid much earlier than Indo-US civil nuclear deal, which is considered like a watershed moment in our relations. We started in mid-90s, and this much talked about exercise Malabar started way back in 1992. And the Army's exercise that we do today started way back in 2002. So since then, defense has remained a vital central pillar or the spinal cord of our relationship. Coming a little closer, the most consequential developments, the speedy developments in our relations have been particularly in last 10 years. Now, in the waning years of Trump 2.0, or Obama 2.0, India was given the major defense partner status formalized in NDA 2017. We initiated Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, signed LIMOA. This is the Indian version of LSA, first of the foundation agreements. Now, this engagement transitioned very smoothly from Obama 2.0 to Trump 1.0. And in fact, during his first tenure, the momentum was built exponentially. We are all very well aware of Asia Pacific being christened as Indo-PACOM. Indo-PACOM Command came into existence. We had Quad. We had the initiation of Ministerial 2.2 dialogue. The remaining foundational agreements, that is the Indian version of SISMOA called COMCASA and BECA for geospatial cooperation, the Industrial Security Annex for exchange of classified information with private industry. Now, these were all concluded under Trump 1.0. India was placed in strategic trade authorization category 1, STA 1. Now, this allows access to greater technology, and this was notably done despite our not yet being a member of Nuclear Supplier Group, which is being blocked by China, obviously for political reasons. Now, India also, in response, uh, modified its defense acquisition procedure in 2020 to accommodate certain concerns that we mutually had. And then we had cooperation between Defense Innovation Unit on the US side and Defense Innovation Organization on the Indian side. And this has manifested into what we have, India US Defense Acceleration Ecosystem, and it is continuing under the current administration. Now, India's engagement with the US CENTCOM and AfricaCom also increased. We exchanged LOs, and this was initiated again during Trump 1.0. We started a bilateral Tiger Triumph exercise, a tri-service exercise in 2019. And you would recall that in 2018, we had huge issues of trade and we had huge issues related to CAATSA sanctions. But during his time, the US Congress approved in NDAA 2019, it provided a room for waivers to punitive sanctions under Section 231 of CAATSA. He's helped India counter terrorism and stopped military assistance to Pakistan. Now, this has been reinforced yet again by extradition orders on Tahawur Rana and calling out Pakistan just day before yesterday. And during his presidency in 2020, the two sides finalized the acquisitions of 24 MH-60 Romeo multi-role helicopters for our Navy. 9 of these have been received. Rest will be received under his watch next couple of years. And then we ordered more Apache helicopters for the Indian Army. So this is how the relationship smoothly moved from Obama to Trump 1.0. It again moved to Biden administration, where all our mill-to-mill relations were maintained, and the focus shifted to defense industrial cooperation with the roadmap, like I mentioned earlier, finalized in June 2023. And the focus shifted onto cooperation for critical and emerging technologies. Now, this was an expansion over the DTTI, which started earlier, and it covered well beyond defense field per se. And the two sides have operationalized it, and the level of engagement has gone up to the NSAs, making scope for lowering of the barriers because engagement has been raised to that level. And we've also signed very recently during our defense minister's visit in August, we signed the security of supply agreement. Now, let's come to day before yesterday's meeting and how do we see it? Now, post 27th January, when President Trump and Prime Minister Modi had their telephone call, there were concerns over the statements that were made of expectations of fair trade and of India increasing procurement of American-made security equipment. Now, it did cause concern that what would it entail? But my reading of the meeting is that the joint statement, whatever it includes, it's very comprehensive in scope. I gave you the scope right in the beginning, that what does it entail, defense cooperation. So this is comprehensive in scope. It is contemporary in nature because it's not looking at old beaten track of counter-terrorist operations, high-altitude warfare. It is looking at future. It's looking at space, underwater domain awareness, cyber, air and missile defense, use of autonomous weapon systems. Now, they signify that it's contemporary in nature. And my third observation is that it signals continuity. Now, continuity, the framework for defense cooperation was first signed in 2005. It's a 10 years framework. It got renewed under Obama 2.0 with Ashton Carter in 2015. And we are going to renew it again in 2025. It signals continuity between us. There's a suggestion of lowering licensing and ITAR barriers by alluding to STA1. And there is a signaling of lowering of offer being open for fifth generation fighters. Well, of course, these are serious decisions which are thought for mutual considerations, and definitely India will look at it from its own perspective. But the fact is, the door has been opened. The defense equipment sought to be sold, like Striker, Javelin, PATI. Now, these have elements of co-production in India, which meets our aspirations. And there's continuity in technology. Like I said, from DTTI, during Biden, we moved to ISET, and under Trump 2.0, we are talking of trust. The new terminology, transforming the relationship utilizing strategic technology. So it has the stamp, but it will move the way we are doing. So what do we do to accelerate? I'll just give a few points and conclude in a minute. That Trump administration could help expedite delayed deliveries of equipment like GE404 engines, 414 engines. Now they are creating a lot of ill feeling on this part because they're impacting our LCA1 program. Expedite the delivery of other hardware that's in pipeline, the helicopters, MH-60, the Apaches, the drones. Cooperate in development of capabilities in space, in underwater domain awareness. Address the regulatory framework with the same dynamism that he's addressing other aspects of relationship. Reorientation of military exercises. Let's move from conventional areas to the high ends of technology, the future wars that will require to be fought. And finally, my suggestion to all my friends who are looking, particularly from the US side, is insulate defense and technology from the turbulence in other fields. Our relationship is so vast, we can never have consonance in every sphere. We cannot balance all the relationship in all the fields together. We can't do it. Let's pick up defense, security, and technology. And let pannus happen, let other things happen around, they will happen. Insulate it, keep it as the spinal cord, and this will help us add momentum to our relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Lieutenant General Anil Ahuja. What words of wisdom you have given. And it's important to see what a tremendous change in the bilateral relationship only 2 days of events have taken. That it has, transformed from something that was stuck in rhetoric and some kind of, incrimination on human rights and all, into a very forward, positive looking strategic partnership. With that being the last talk from Lieutenant General Ahuja, I will start going to question and answers. I'm not going to read every question because we have shortage of time. So the first question I am going to read, I'm going to paraphrase it. Vice President Vance, while speech at Munich Security Conference, made certain statements, and he said that don't actually take up Uncle Sam for Uncle Sucker. And that statement was actually meant for Europe. And it is very certain that it is going to have larger implications on US-Europe relationship. The question is, and it will be addressed by Professor Walter Anderson, will this push Europe closer to China in the near future? Professor Anderson. Kindly unmute yourself, sir. You're muted. Kindly unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think I've unmuted it. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. As I take it, the core of it is, the relationship of the U.S. with China. Is that the question, given the issues that are at stake that Vice President Vance had mentioned at Munich? To be quite frank, I think we're going to continue to have a tense relationship with China for a number of reasons, some of which actually relate to India and sort of the assertiveness of China on the border with India, and the fact that Chinese have not given up their territorial claims on parts of India, including in the far east of India. Whether that's going to result in a war, that really depends on how assertive the Chinese. At least in the last several months, they seem to have pulled back somewhat on their assertiveness. But I think much of that, Chinese reaction depends on their perception of how tough the U.S. and, in this case, India will be on assertions of Chinese power. And so we'll have to see what the Chinese do. As I said, recently they seem to have pulled back a bit, but they haven't given up their claims, and that includes on parts of northeastern India as well as on Taiwan itself. So we'll see. And I think the Indians, seem to be moving in a direction of not only a stronger economy, which also, as I mentioned, helps, the military, but a tougher stand on how it reacts to the defense of its own borderlands.
I think the question was whether Vice President Vance's comments, somewhat critical of Europe, will push Europe closer to China.
Oh, will push Europe closer to China. I think that the Europeans have a similar interest. My own background, as I may have mentioned to you, is Danish, and so I keep in close contact with what the Danish publications say. And the Europeans, they have developed trade relations with China, but in terms of how they react to China, there's a certain suspicion. Though the relationship of Europe and China is different from our relationship, the U.S. as well as the Indian, in that we have a direct relationship because with threats from China. The Europeans do not have a direct, relationship with Chinese threats as such, except as it applies to economics, and that's important. And they're concerned about that. In fact, part of that concern is there are restraints that they have on Chinese investment in Europe. And one only has to look at the European press, and I read the Danish press, to get a sense that there is a suspicion about that. But it's different. The Europeans are not as directly involved as we are and as you are in China. So the more important question, to be quite frank, is how we react and how India reacts, Japan reacts. And I just want to say a brief thing about Japan. We didn't really bring up the issue of Japan. Japan is an important and interesting aspect to all of this. And someday you may want to have a meeting on how these other countries react to China, because they have been so quite critical of China. And in the case of Japan and Vietnam, there is a significantly increased military expenditure to signal to the China that they will be tough in response to any assertiveness by the Chinese.
Thank you, Professor Anderson. I'll address next question to Professor Sen Ni, and I'm actually combining two questions. Professor Sen Ni, if you can unmute yourself, you're muted. The two questions are, you talked about actually headwinds in Chinese economy. Do you have any references to share with our audience? Because somebody from our audience does want to have specific references, because we have made very, very interesting observations on the slide in Chinese economy. And the second question is, going through all this, do you envisage, as a close watcher of China, a situation akin to Tiananmen Square re-happening or reoccurring in China?
Okay, about the more reference, because the talk is limited to 15 minutes. I do have some detailed reference on that. You asked for submitting of a written speech. I will go through again, make sure that I give the most of the source of the data I reference to. then about the potential route or oppositions like Tiananmen Squares, and people probably still remember that in 2022 there's so-called white paper revolution. That's when the frustrated people, because of the lockdown and zero tolerance policy about COVID-19 and declining of the economies and unemployment, the young people hold up the white paper to protest against the authority. And white paper has nothing written there. It leaves to the readers to think. And there's a lot of understanding of that because of the white paper revolutions at different cities across the country. Chairman Xi, who immediately stopped the zero tolerance policy and lockdown and released that, because one of the plan, the whole people think that's President Xi, step down. CCP, Chinese Communist Party, step down. So there is a high level of frustration of people, particularly those people at the bottom and also middle class, about the CCP's ruling. So it's more like California, the White Files. There are a lot of dried woods and stuff there. And whenever, which was in China, whenever there's a situation, incidents happening, then it is possible, it's the time for Chinese people to come up and uprising to overthrow the regime. So I think so.
Thank you, Professor Sen. Next question I'll address to Professor Anderson. It's from Mr. Vijay Nilekani. And he says, if I was advising President Trump, I would ask him to remove the legal barriers of extraditing David Headley, the architect of 26/11 terror attacks. It would earn huge goodwill in India and cost the United States nothing. Any comments?
Yeah, could I just make a brief comment on the previous statement? I taught for the last 10 years, for 3 months a year, in the graduate school of Tongji University in Shanghai. I can tell you from my own experience about how students are reacting. They are concerned about jobs in the future of China, and that has having an effect on marriage. It was very common in previous years when I was there that many of my students got married, very few this time. And I often ask them, what's the delay? Delay is worry about the future, their future, economic future. I just wanted to say that, from my experience in teaching in China. The other question, I didn't quite understand, what is the thrust of the question?
The question was about extradition of David Headley,
Headley,
the architect of 26/11.
Yeah. The U.S. has no sympathy for people like Headley. I can tell you that now. And there have been editorials written about the U.S. easing the restriction. As you know, we are, in fact, sending to India another person who was connected to that whole event. My guess is that that will happen. Because the Trump government is not at all sympathetic to people like that. And the Indian government is certainly, I think, going to continue to push on this issue, which I think it should. And in fact, if we can get articles written in the press would even be better. But I think this will, for the question, I think my own sense and what I know of people who work in the Defense Department and State Department is the U.S. will move in a direction of deporting people who were linked to that. We have other questions like that, but I won't get into that now about other people. But this administration, I think, will be tougher. And we have an attorney general in the United States who on that issue, Pam Bondi from Florida, who is very tough. And I think you're going to find a toughness that you did not find in the previous administration.
There's a question from the audience, and it was actually addressed to Ron Alido, who has already left because of some other issue. The question is, if China is a main competitor of US, as mentioned by new Secretary of Defense in Europe, then can USA take the risk of giving away Taiwan, which is a critical part of the first island chain? Taiwan and China can be a force multiplier for China in semiconductor war. What are your comments on that? If China were to take Taiwan and US not making any noises about it, Professor Anderson.
Oh, that's for me.
Yeah.
So if China were to take Taiwan,
The US were not
that-
making any
that-
noise.
what's that?
If US were
If it
not
was-
making any noise, combine China and Taiwan, it will become a major power in semiconductors.
It's hard for me. The audio is not very good, so I'll have to sort of guess at what the question is. The U.S. on Taiwan, in cooperation with countries that count like Japan and South Korea and Australia and India to a certain extent, would take a very negative view on, in fact, they already do, on Chinese threats to Taiwan, such as surrounding it and creating problems. If they were to actually move to take Taiwan, that would create a crisis. It would be a crisis similar to what happened right before World War II. And I think the Chinese know this. And Professor Dr. Sneed is probably in a better position to give the Chinese reaction to how they're going to move on to China when you have the U.S. and Japan and others. You know, this would create a crisis of the first proportion. And there would be all sorts of demands in this country that the U.S. would have to do something about that. And if there's a threat of war, that would be a threat of war, you know, to do it. I think the Chinese realize that.
Thank you, Professor Anderson. We were running behind the time, so I will no longer take any more questions and try to stick to the schedule. I'm going to invite Major General B.K. Sharma to extend vote of thanks to everyone. Major General Sharma. Sir, kindly unmute yourself. You're muted.
Thank you, Dr. Jyangji, for giving me this opportunity. I think we had some very pointed observations made by our esteemed speakers. And what I can just summarize that Ron Alado said that, well, what we are going to see, no matter whether we like or not, we're going to see a very, very assertive and transactional Trump. And he's really going to rock the boat. Second thing, we also learned that when China, its strategic behavior, particularly India's neighborhood, is going to increase. And if you look at from Indian perspective, there are more convergences between India and US than they have ever been. And there are certain divergences which are manageable. Then there was a very fascinating presentation on the very dim prognosis about Chinese economy and its impact on the social stability within China and the credibility of the Chinese Communist Party. To what an extent that will pan out, in what manner, given the very, very oppressive regime that exists there, and then the hatred which Chinese people have. I've been visiting China almost every year for the West and for the United States of America, whether it manifests in some kind of a larger social strife, that is an imponderable we can't really comment upon. There is also this issue about defense cooperation, like General Ahuja has very clearly mapped out, you know, the trajectory of the relations. And today, I think the relations are looking very, very bright. But there are also certain disappointments as far as India is concerned. For example, this 404 engine, the delay that is caused in our Tejas program, and you would have heard that Air Chief has been very, very vocal about it, and it is creating really problem because today our squadron levels have actually fallen to about F-30 squadrons, which is really not in a very healthy state. So there has to be something that by March this year, there has to be a fast-paced delivery of these aircraft engines so that we are able to keep pace. I think that in times to come, we are also going to witness, at least in Indian media, some kind of a controversy about the direct deal of F-35. There are elements within India who are not very amenable to induct F-35, and that may further cause strain as it had caused in the past between the two countries. But the biggest issue is the transfer of technology. Whether it is going to be a buyer and seller relationship, or it is going to be transfer of technology in sync with India's Atmanirbhar Bharat, that we have to see. And I don't have any answers to that. But I'll just cap it up by looking at a larger issue. That if the kind of disruptions that are coming about in Euro-Atlantic Alliance, and particularly towards Europe, and at the same time in East Asian Alliance, particularly the position on Taiwan, will it serve the larger interest of US as a major vector of global stability and US-led international system or global order? Or there would be question marks from different geographies of globe on the credibility of United States of America as a glue in the international system? And is it that if the Chinese economy is able to bounce back, and the way they have spread themselves in the larger context, that will China emerge as a dark horse, and which will it actually become the champion of globalization that it has been advocating? So these are some of the questions I think we require another debate. But I think this panel has thrown more interesting questions than we have answered, and I think we require another session to discuss some of these pointed issues. So with these observations, I once again thank you and our eminent panelists for some very, very fascinating and pointed remarks, and we look forward together with you more such sessions in times to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Major General B.K. Sharma. Indeed, this is the first joint conference or webinar with United Services Institution of India, and this is just a beginning. So I assure you that we will have more such opportunities in future for very productive, fruitful, strategic discussions on international relations and geopolitics. Using my moderator's position, I will possibly make some observations before closing this conference. United States is going through an ideological and an intellectual revolution as we saw the transition between two administrations. And as one says that there is an opportunity in every crisis, this is an opportunity for India to consolidate the comprehensive relationship. The future looks to be very good. The irritants that were there under Biden administration were just an artifact of one particular individual. It was continuation of a Cold War mentality in the US State Department that had persisted even after end of the Cold War for decades to come, and you will see probably end of that. So irritants like delay in transfer of technology, delay in the contracted defense equipment, i.e. GE 404 engines or 414 engines, you will see probably a different trajectory in the next 4 years. And that is good. So we will also see a less vocal, less critical United States on social issues, on human rights, on democracy, on religious freedom, the things that are quote unquote weaponized to tackle with certain countries. That situation is going, US is going through an internal, if I may say, restructuring or perestroika, to use that word. That is what is happening when US aid is being dismantled and the president of the country talks about US aid having been used to destabilize countries like India and Bangladesh and Indian subcontinent. So you are going to see a qualitatively a different United States than it has been. And most of the people don't realize the pace of change, the enormity of the change. What General Anil Ahuja talked about was DTTI that has been supplemented by Compact, catalyzing opportunities for military partnership, accelerated commerce and technology for 21st century. So we are going into a totally different dimension at this point in time. It is a win-win-win situation. It's a win-win-win situation for India, for United States, and if I may say, it is a win-win-win. The third win is for the rest of the world, because with these two countries harmonizing their strategic and economic interests, it will bring a semblance of stability, a new dimension in international relations. The objective of Mission 500, increasing the bilateral trade to 500 billions, will probably take away the minor irritants of $45 billion trade deficit. Because in next few months, you will have negotiation of a bilateral free trade agreement between United States and India. That is going to come. There were some discussions in 2019 and 2020 before Mr. Trump left the presidency. Deals could not be negotiated or could not be concluded. But once a bilateral free trade agreement between US and India is negotiated successfully to the benefit of both partners, you will see India becoming one of the major economic partners with the United States. And these minor irritants, $45 billion trade deficit, would be a small issue at that point in time. So we are witnessing actually making of history and making of a new global international order if both the parties play their cards smartly and don't actually burden each other with undue demands. With that comment, I am going to give my profuse thanks first to Major General B.K. Sharma, who, took our offer of collaborative work in a very positive spirit. And this is the outcome of that, positive spirit between Council for Strategic Affairs and United Services Institution of India. I'm also highly thankful to all our distinguished panelists, starting from Mr. Ran Alido, Professor Walter Anderson, Major General Rajendra Singh Yadav, Professor Sen Ni, and Lieutenant General Anil Ahuja for excellent, precise, and to the point presentations that were very appropriate for this theme. I'm also thankful to our audience members who are sitting in United States on a Saturday morning and sitting in India on a Sunday evening when the usual thing is partying at that point in time on a weekend, have found 2 hours of their precious time for this particular conference. So very thankful to them. My heartiest thanks to Team CSA, mainly Mr. Rajiv Verma and Mr. Ripudaman Pachori, who are helpful to me as solid pillars of support behind the scene because they make all these things happen. And as I said, I look forward to more joint conferences and seminars with United Services Institution of India. This is the first one, but this certainly will not be the last one. This seminar has been recorded. It has been live streamed on YouTube, our YouTube channel. It will be available on our website as well as on our YouTube channel as a future resource material. With that, thank you very much indeed. We are 11:59 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our closing time was 12, so we have made up our time. Thank you very much indeed to all the participants, all the panelists, Major General B.K. Sharma, and everyone else. Thank you very much indeed. And I will be closing this session.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.